各位朋友，我们之前呢已经给大家看过杰弗里·萨克斯的2段演讲。第一段呢是他先独立发表自己的观点，之后呢就开始有其他参会人员的提问。那么从上次的那段视频开始，到现在的这段，还有之后的几段都是别人提问后他回答问题的。我这里呢没有给大家提供前面那些提问的内容因为提问的话是用西班牙语的，我也听不懂。不过呢，从他对这些问题的回答，我们大致能够揣摩出是什么问题。但是你要是听了他的回答会发现其实提了什么问题已经不重要了，因为他的回答可能比问题要精彩得多。好，那我们就开始吧。
Thank you very much, and thanks for the nice words and also the very good question of how we finance this transformation. There's a general point, which is that when we look at the investments that are needed for sustainable development, some are at the company or commercial level and others are at the public level. This is a mix of public and private investment. When it comes to the public investment, this requires a fiscal framework that one has to analyze over a long period of time because these are investments that are 10, 20, 30-year investments. And so careful fiscal management is one of the most important aspects of this transformation. As a general principle, governments need more revenue to carry out this transformation because there need to be more public investments. So I would advocate for any government to take as hard as it is, and it's not a literal plan, but it is a planning process to take a 30-year or 40-year perspective of the public finances, taking into account demographic change, aging populations, different expenses that will result from the care economy or the health sector, the added expenditures that will be necessary for the energy sector, and so on. Very few governments do that kind of analysis, but it's really worth doing. You have to do it alongside a public investment framework because, as I emphasized, the energy transformation itself is not a 5-year or 10-year operation. It is basically a 30-year operation.
他在这里就三番五次的强调了，可持续发展是必须要做的，而且必须要做30年到40年的长远规划。这是由能源转型自身的特性所决定的。为什么能源转型需要这么长的时间呢？这里就插播一段我以前的一段视频。能源行业的规模巨大，任何巨大的东西都会变得更加复杂，惯性呢也很大，都会呢抗拒变革，所以我们自觉或者不自觉的在能源行业内就养成了很强的惰性。这就是我前面说的化石燃料的使用的舒适区。而在能源行业呢，要投入庞大的成本，那么就是因为这个资本投入太多所以成本回收的时间呢也就必然会拉长。你如果要不断的转型，那么就没有人愿意这么干，甚至会阻碍你开发新的技术。还有一个呢，就是我们对能源的安全性的担忧。核电技术呢很早就发明出来了，但是几起核电站的事故之后，反对核电的声浪那是一浪高一浪。使得这个技术的使用呢很是艰难那么尽管现在1亿年之中死于燃煤污染的人可能远远比死于所有核事故的人的总和还要多所以如何改变这些固有的想法，打造一个新的能源体系呢？要既保证我们所喜欢的可靠性和安全性，并消除了我们不喜欢的东西，比如对化石燃料的依赖这是一个理想。但这条路呢走起来真的很艰难这是我解读比尔盖茨的新书《气候经济与人类未来》中的一个章节的一段这整套视频呢对于大家理解碳中和政策还是非常有帮助的。如果你对这方面的话题有兴趣的话，不妨去找找这段视频看一看。好，我们接着呢看萨克斯的演讲。
Again, very few governments do this. It's not easy. It's also not typical. Typically, you make a 1-year budget. Some countries make a 5-year plan. Almost no countries make a 30-year framework. but actually governments borrow 30 years, and it wouldn't hurt them to figure out what the implications are of that.
他在这里想说的是一个需要30年整体规划的事儿，你现在5年的计划显然是不匹配的，会比较短视。他这里呢，显然是指的是类似美国这样的政治体制，一届政府阻隔只有4到8年的时间，很难做长远打算。他说几乎没有国家会制定30年的框架，幸亏他这里说的是 almost no， 因为至少我们知道的中国在大的国家战略上面就有长的计划，不仅有30年的，还有50年的，甚至还有100年的大计，对吧？当然我们也有短期的5年的计划，那都是针对解决具体短期矛盾的，而且与长远规划呢并不冲突。那么如果只有短期规划，具体会发生什么样的问题呢？我们接着看。
The politicians don't like the story very much because it means that public revenues are an important part of this process. The weakest part of the American political system is on the public finance. One of the reasons why America is just in a downward spiral is that Ronald Reagan came to the presidency 41 years ago and said that the key to America's success was to cut taxes. That was a political winner. It has remained a political winner for 41 years. It has been a policy disaster for 41 years. It turned the United States from a mild social democratic country to a nearly libertarian neoliberal country because we can't pay for anything. And so when you're in that spiral and you can't pay for anything, you also blame the poor because you have to blame somebody if things aren't good. So we turned into a country absolutely blaming poor people, hating poor people. This is completely dysfunctional for a society, and that's what we are in. Not to digress, the point is, if you weaken the public finances, you end up with an inability to have a decent society.
这基本上就描述了美国目前的政治体制由来的一段历史的确，在历史上的某个阶段，美国的政治体制可能恰巧表现出某些优越性，但随着时代的发展，你必须要做顺应时代发展的改革也要看看别人是否有值得自己学习的地方，对不对？否则就会变得越来越不适应目前的环境了，这很正常嘛。最后自己呢也会变得不是说有多么糟糕，至少就是很普通了呗。但如果这个时候你还是那么高度自信，对于这种现象，最近有一个词叫做普信男，是吧？好像说的就是这个意思。那么我们现在如果将这种情况放在美国头上，似乎也挺恰当的我们就索性称它为普信国吧。
The top of our rankings of SDG fulfillment are the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries reliably, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. Why? Well, one reason is they tax nearly 50% of national income. And they actually also show up, contrary to the Wall Street Journal theory of the world, they show up as the happiest countries in the world. If the Wall Street Journal were right, they would be the least happy countries in the world. They would be in a state of complete despair. If you go to Copenhagen, it doesn't look like a country in despair, by the way. It looks like a pretty happy country.
Yeah. 那么这一段，他用事实打脸美国的《华尔街日报》的事件理论，所以那些动辄用美国的经济学理论来指责中国的事我们以后听到这样的言论，要多一个心眼。他目前的头衔是经济学家，你不会觉得他对这样问题的见解不值得重视吧？
I once was in Stockholm and I got something in my eye and I had to step into a clinic. And of course, at the end, they did a very nice job. And I said, how do I pay? Or here's my insurance. And they looked at me like I was crazy. You don't pay, go, because it's paid. In the United States, it would have been about 8 hours of paperwork. You probably wouldn't have gotten serviced. And then it would be 18 months trying to correct the bills from the insurance company trying to charge you a co-payment of $3,400 for those 5 minutes in the clinic. So you need a public sector that is significant and large.
这一段呢，他用自己的亲身经历，虽然故事有些夸张啊，但的确呢，给我们一个非常清晰的比较。北欧国家的高福利是基于一个庞大的公共体系的。虽然北欧这些国家的做法不一定可以被其他国家所拷贝，但至少在这一点上美国跟人家没法比。
Having said that, let me add one more different point. Developing countries are almost by definition capital scarce. That means they don't have all-weather roads, power transmission lines, power generation, safe water and sanitation for the cities, digital connectivity, even electrification, basic electrification is missing. And children are not in school, not because they don't want, but because the budget can't afford it. Yeah. So just a very quick example. If you're a country at $500 per capita, and there are such countries, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I was a couple of weeks ago. To educate a child for a year is at least $500 per capita. So let's say it's 1 unit of GDP per person. Well, DRC has 40% of its population at school age. So to educate all the children minimally, to put them in school, would cost 40% of GDP. But the budget is 10% of GDP. Okay, so 3/4 of the kids aren't in school. What do you think the future's like for that country? What do you think the future's like for Europe as a neighbor of that country? It makes no sense. If you do the arithmetic, which is my life, you know, for a few tens of billions of dollars, you could get kids in school. That's what Europe should be doing, exactly what Violetta said. It's not even complicated. President van der Leyen should sit down with the President Macky Sall of the African Union and should say, we will accompany you so that all your children are in school. We'll help you because we need to do that, but you certainly need to do that. So we'll help you get all those kids in school. We'll also help the schools to have some electricity with solar panels on the top, some digital connectivity, so the kids also can learn something. And then you add up the bill, and believe me, it will be cheaper than what we're going to waste in Ukraine in a few weeks. And you're going to build a future, and a future for Africa. So that's really what should be done. But we don't do it right now. It's unaccountable to me why we don't do it. Because our deepest instinct should be help ensure that children have a future. There can't be anything more basic in human nature, frankly, than that. And that is systematic, and it requires a budget. And if it's an impoverished country, it requires help from a non-impoverished neighbor. So that, I think, is the basic point. I don't believe we need a debt crisis. In other words, I don't believe that it's inevitable.
大道至简，他用一个简单的算术题告诉你，欧洲为什么要帮助非洲？并不是说你们有多么善良，而是这样做对你们有好处。是不得不做的，因为我们是一个人类命运共同体。成本有多少？还不到现在乌克兰几周的花费。这样简单的算术呢，我们大家一听就懂。但就是这么简单的东西，显然与西方媒体所大肆渲染的格格不入。有人说，萨克斯是不是只是说，只是键盘侠，也没有做什么具体的事儿呢？其实不是的啊，他一直在努力，做了许多的具体的工作。我们来看看啊。
I believe we absolutely need to pay attention. I'm trying to help the IMF, by the way, to understand these numbers because they didn't before. And I've been working with the IMF for the last 3 years. How much does it cost to have a child in school? How much is 1 year of healthcare coverage? How much does it cost to pave a road for 1 kilometer? How much does it cost to have a gigawatt of power capacity added? They're doing a wonderful job now. Here's where they've come to. There's a big gap for poor countries of about $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion, if you're a macroeconomist, is not exactly a yawn, but it's nothing to get too unsettled about. Because $1 trillion a year is less than 1% of world output. So if you calculate that for 4 billion people, $1 trillion a year would close the financing gaps, you say, oh, this is fantastic news. This is not even hard. But then I have to get the attention, try to get the attention of a US senator or congressman to care about this at all. None, nobody, zero. They think you're crazy. I don't even try anymore. I don't even go to Washington anymore. It's completely useless. So that's the problem.
看到这里，大家是否感受到了他的一些无奈？大家只要翻看一下他的简历就知道，他一直以来啊就是一个实实在在的践行者。从当初的满腔热血，到现在多少有点无奈的情绪啊。说起来的话，还是蛮让人心酸的。所以在目前的世界形势下，我们做好自己，做强做大自己的国家，争取做一个真性国，而不是普信国。这期的视频呢，我想到了2个小标题，第一个是简单算术了解世界危机，另一个是41年后美国成了普信国。你们觉得哪个更贴切啊？我是复旦赵斌，谢谢你的关注。